Hi, everyone. Thanks for accessing this on-demand session on increasing the impact of vendor risk management programs. My name is Colin Brown with Level Up Consulting Group. Appreciate everyone taking a few minutes to join us today, where we're going to present a few simple strategies to start moving vendor risk management programs from, the traditional sort of IT risk and compliance activities into incorporating risk from broader stakeholders across the organization. As I mentioned, my name is Colin Brown. I'm a director at Level Up Consulting Group. I'm responsible for the overall success of our third-party risk or vendor risk management services. I've worked with a lot of organizations from small enterprises to Fortune 500 on privacy and vendor risk management issues, and really excited to share some perspectives on things that we've seen our clients do well and things that we've seen our clients struggle with, and try to draw some lessons and think about what we can do better in our vendor risk management programs based on that. Before we start, just a little bit about Level Up Consulting Group. We kind of operate across different industries, and divide our services up into a few buckets of core services across compliance and standards, vendor risk management, which we're going to talk a lot about today, data privacy and cybersecurity, and then of course across all of those our OneTrust partner services, where we help a lot of organizations that are either implementing OneTrust or using OneTrust, build their risk and compliance programs using the tool, or more effectively operationalize certain things using OneTrust and kind of optimize their use of the OneTrust platform. The issue that we're talking about today really relates back to the evolving nature of vendor risk today. Traditionally, I think the challenge has been that we've seen vendor risk management approached with a narrow focus. It's often an activity that IT security and compliance professionals approach, but it's not always incorporated broader operational, financial, reputational risks, starting to branch out to the organization and think about what some of our other stakeholders may be concerned with. I think the outlook is that vendor risk management programs evolve to provide these key inputs for more operational decision making. I think we've all seen it the past couple of years, struggles with vendor risk management that have hit all of us personally, and we can think about things that weren't always addressed in traditional vendor risk management programs. So we can take that and start thinking about how we do that better today. Study to kind of illustrate this point. We have two different examples of a risk manifesting itself and a lesson that's learned, because it shows a commonality among both examples. In the shipping space, we have one example of a shipping company, a very large shipping company that ends up in bankruptcy, very sudden, receivership that ended in eventual bankruptcy, but it left goods on ships stranded just outside of ports and unable to make it to the shelves, right? We can't bring product to the end consumer. Likewise, we have another well-publicized event where a shipping company was hit with a malware attack, and I think many of us know what happened, because it really brought down so many operational systems. Again, ships are stranded outside of ports, goods can't make it to the consumer. So what lesson can we learn from this? And I think it's that we really benefit from building a more complete picture about vendor risk, right? Not just thinking about vendor risk from an information security perspective, but thinking about, in the first example, it was a financial condition. Had we done, a significant amount of financial due diligence, would we have seen something that triggers a red flag for us? Maybe, maybe not, but it serves as a kind of lesson that maybe we should be looking at some of those broader risks. And so what we've seen traditionally from vendor risk management programs is that we have a diverse group of stakeholders illustrated in this left-hand column, and they each have their own risk objectives, right? They may be after one or two of these different risk objectives. I gave the example of IT security. They may be thinking about cybersecurity, maybe compliance, maybe privacy as well. But then you have other teams that during the vendor onboarding process, they're evaluating a vendor from a unique perspective. And oftentimes what we found is that even in the presence of a good GRC platform, these different stakeholders are not communicating. They're taking a distributed approach. And so vendor risk management is really uniquely positioned to take a shared service model and become a single point of reference for different stakeholders that have to make decisions based on risk. And so today our goal is to talk about 5 simple strategies that get us thinking about how we might do that. And so we're going to start with looking at key risk indicators, talking about how we tie those to objectives, how we scope a vendor's service, the services or product that a vendor is going to provide to make sure we really have a firm understanding of what they're doing and what risk considerations might apply. The benefits of clearly defining the vendor risk management lifecycle, translating vendor risk to business risk, and then tying it all together by how do we do this with a scalable technology in place. So identifying key risk indicators is a really important activity when we think about branching out, talking to those other operational stakeholders about what's important to them. A KRI, many of you are going to be familiar with what this is. It's something that's important for our organization to understand and manage, right? These could be gaps, if we're thinking about it from a risk perspective, gaps that have about things that a vendor doesn't have in place, right? If a vendor doesn't have X, that's a key risk indicator, a kind of red flag for us. If certain metrics don't meet our policy requirements, that's a red flag. Maybe that's a KRI that we track. Why are these things important? Because they determine how we assess and how we monitor, maybe how often we reassess a vendor down the road. And they address specific business risks, right? These KRIs shouldn't be randomly chosen. They should address specific things that business stakeholders have told us are important to us. And who goes through this activity, this exercise of defining key risk indicators? Well, this really depends on how broad your vendor risk management program is. Sure, it's going to be your information security, your compliance teams. But again, the goal as we start taking a shared service model approach is to involve stakeholders from other teams. Maybe it's finance, maybe it's supply chain, people that are already doing risk assessments on vendors. Can we bring them into the fold, and can we create that single point of reference? That's not to say that that their subject matter expertise still isn't going to be necessary and they're going to do their own things in the process, but can we start streamlining and building a common centralized place where this risk intelligence lives? Just a couple of examples to kind of hammer home what these key risk indicators are. We have 2 different examples of objectives. Driving customer sales might be a business objective, but also protecting confidentiality of customer information, right? Nobody wants to be the next breached organization. So we then think about what's a risk that would impact that objective, right? That would adversely impact us. From an e-commerce perspective, if we can't fulfill orders through a vendor-supported platform, that's a risk, right? And so our KRI based on that might be something that triggers a concern around the availability of that vendor's systems, right? If they don't have a BCP or DR plan, that might be a key risk indicator for us or a red flag. On the confidentiality side, there might be different ways we approach a certain risk, right? We might have a KRI around encryption for data at rest and in transit, or on the flip side, on the kind of the other control that might be in place could be an incident management and breach response plan. A vendor that doesn't have one of those might be a red flag for us, because if they did have an incident, we're not confident that they would be able to manage it effectively. Once we have these KRIs in place, we can think about how we scope vendor services. So building scoping criteria that capture the information that we need is critically important. So we might capture not just those KRIs that we that we talked about before, but other pieces of information, financial information, which may link back to a KRI. If we defined it, a vendor that maybe doesn't meet certain ratios for us, that might be a KRI. We might track what's the geographies and markets that are going to be impacted by this vendor's product or service. That might trigger certain compliance requirements. The middle portion there, the scoping of the service, is very important. If we don't have an understanding of exactly what that vendor does and how it's going to do it, we don't understand what controls that vendor is going to be responsible for versus which ones we're going to be responsible for. We might understand, are there existing vendors or services that are out there that we can compare a certain vendor to? And then also, of course, we're going to get vendor contact details because we're going to need to send assessments to that vendor. So what is this? What's kind of the workflow for these scoping procedures? Well, we want our scoping results to determine what our in-scope risks are, and then what risks we may want to zero in on from there, right? Where, if we're going to do a full risk assessment, for those of you familiar with the SIG Lite, covers many different domains, but not all of those may be in scope based on how we've scoped that vendor's services. These boxes down here in the risk assessment domains, these can be, again, these are kind of a subset of the total possible risk universe, but you might start cherry picking certain of these or de-scoping others based on the results of the scoping assessment. As we think about performing different assessments, now we need to start thinking about what's our vendor risk management lifecycle. From scoping through offboarding, we want to have really defined, what is happening at each stage, who is doing it, and what's the defined output. That who becomes really important because as we start bringing more stakeholders into the vendor risk management process, we now have, more people involved, more stakeholders that we need to interface with. So the who can become more complicated at each stage. So we really want to have that well defined. Also, the output, having a tangible output at each stage is really important. Oftentimes, a vendor assessment will it'll languish in a certain stage, and we're not even sure when it moves from one stage to the next, what came out of that? What do I now have that's tangible that I can say was the result of a particular, completion of a workflow stage? So really important as we mature our vendor risk management programs to think about our vendor risk management lifecycle. I mentioned earlier bringing more business stakeholders into our vendor risk management process, but if we're going to do that, translating risk into business terms is very important. So we might think about these risks on the left-hand column from a risk practitioner's perspective, like not having a data subject request process in place. Well, what does that mean from a business perspective? They may not be privacy experts. So we need to get them to understand that this could lead to non-compliance with privacy laws. There's monetary fines associated with that. Business stakeholders understand that. Not having BCP and DR plans, or not having applications that are blacklisted and whitelisted, network scanning technologies. What does this mean? From a business perspective, they don't care about the technical controls, and I think that's a mistake that our clients often make, is that we provide these assessments of risk to a business stakeholder, and we get a so what in return. So the more we can translate that into their language to say, what does it mean for our business? Does it mean that a vendor is more likely to be unavailable when we need them? They will understand that because it relates specifically to the service they're interested in. And finally, bringing this all together, scaling it with technology. What are the key attributes of a technology? The first one is workflow configuration. In order to define that vendor risk management lifecycle, we have to be able to configure the workflows for the lifecycle that works for us. If we're bringing more stakeholders into the fold, we need a collaborative technology, something that we can very easily bring in additional users and train them on what they need to do. We've been talking throughout about performing assessments, scoping assessments, other types of assessments, but we talked about tailoring those to our specific needs. If we can't customize those assessments, then the platform is not going to work for us. And then finally, on the due diligence and monitoring side, we need tools to make sure that vendor risk management is not a static point in time assessment. It is an ongoing cycle. So after we assess a particular vendor, we may want to track, a third-party risk intelligence tool that gives us a score. If that score changes throughout the life cycle of that vendor, we may want to reassess that vendor. Did they have a security event? What triggered that? Is it something that we need to be concerned with? Having the ability to pull in that intelligence makes our monitoring stage that much more effective. So hopefully today we've been able to share with you a few quick strategies that get you thinking about how you might take your vendor risk management program and move it beyond just reviewing a SOC report, doing a SIG Lite, and incorporating broader risk considerations into your program. Appreciate everyone's time today, and thanks for joining us, and look forward to speaking with you soon.